See, all set to go. Let's see if we can get Phil ready. Did I eat? Oh, we're gonna get that set up later. All right. Let's call Phil Japikse as our next pair programmer. Let's make sure this works. There we go.
Hey.
All right, waiting for the camera to come through.
I'm sure I got the right one. Yep.
Cool. Alrighty, and let's double check over here. I think we're ready to go. I gotta bump Mads down and bring up, where's Phil? There he is.
Nope, still Mads.
One more click. There it is. There's Phil. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Oh, doing great. Back to Ohio for another one of our friends from, well, this time Western Ohio, right?
Southwest corner.
Not like those Northeast corner Ohio people.
Yeah, we don't talk about them. We don't claim them. We'll give them to Michigan.
Oh, and we got to change hats. Hang on, got to change to the next hat.
Oh, you're changing it.
Yes, absolutely. Gonna switch to my VS Live Share hat. All right. And Tion Isla is saying we need Anders Hausberg. Nah, Anders has his own thing he's doing with TypeScript. He's not going to be joining us today. Uploading coffee, they're saying in the chat room. All right. So, thanks so much for joining me. Do you want to give folks a quick introduction of who you
are? Sure. My name is Phil Japikse, normally found as Schematic online, Skimedic. However, somebody on Twitch has that ID, so I wasn't able to claim that. I do enterprise architecture, I do agile coaching, write lots of books. I've got a bunch of courses on LinkedIn Learning as well, and speak just about everywhere you can think of.
And we've got a couple of links to those resources, some of those books and courses that Phil's written. You can find them on that workshop resource page that we have out there on GitHub. Now, I wanted to bring you in because you're an expert on some of these design patterns that folks use to design and build their applications. And I made sure I went and brought in, you had some slides you wanted to show to kind of talk through some of this topic a little bit. Let's see if I can get this running properly. Oh, and we got live share working too. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be looking at code later. I really wanted to talk about Solid before we even got into design patterns.
Fantastic. Let me grab those slides and fire.
Don't worry, folks. It's only a few slides. I know this is a little different than sitting there watching Mads program. So sorry to let y'all down, but
no. Yeah, there's things I think that architecture type topics, design type topics, you do want to go into, and show some graphics, some images to kind of talk around, how these things fit together,
Right.
Let's see. Seriously, these people are saints for doing this. Oh, thank you. Two of my favorite topics. Oh yeah, design patterns, they're saying. All right. Terrific. So this is going to be weird. I'm going to go over to the code, but it's not code. We're going to a slideshow, right?
Yeah, we'll be in code. There's only a few slides. And you'll like the pictures, I think.
There we go. Look at that. I'm sitting in your slide deck here. Look at that. All right. Let me flip over so I can do the little control gizmo. Cool. All right. Intro slide. Trying to get, there it is. All righty.
Yeah, you can skip by that one.
Skip by that one. Next one, there's all about Phil. Oh, and pictures of the books. Look at that. 2 books out there. You can get building web applications from with Visual Studio, Pro C#7. Fantastic. I wrote 1 book, and I don't think I'm writing another. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. It's a little brutal.
Oof. All right. So, Sushinator, no, we're starting just a little bit late here, but I think we're going to be okay on time.
Yeah. We'll make it work.
All right, so solid design principles. Okay.
So when we talk about solid, Uncle Bob came up with a paper. Seems like eons ago now, and I believe the title was "Principles of Object-Oriented Design." And he talked about 5 principles, and he talked about them actually in SOLDI order. And just a funny little aside about that. One of his friends called him up and said, "Hey, if you change the order, you could call it solid, and it'd be really cool." Um, but it's something that we really should strive to do. As developers, we spend the vast majority of our time as janitors, working in other people's code base, or maintaining, doing bug fixes, adding features. We very seldom get to do the greenfield thing. And the thing about greenfield is it very quickly turns into not greenfield.
So
Uh,
greenfield, just quickly, right? Those are new projects when you refer to greenfield projects.
right. We all want to be able to do the file new project, start from scratch, but the vast reality is, even when you do a new project from scratch, pretty soon, once you release it, you're now in maintenance mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it's I love the phrase. I don't remember who coined it, but imagine that the next person looking at your code is an axe wielding psychopath.
Don't do that.
And do you want to write code that's going to make that person angry? Well, in reality, the next person looking at your code is probably you, right?
Yeah.
6 weeks, 6 months down the road, feature request or problem report comes in, and you're looking at this code and you're going, "Who the heck wrote this crap?"
Oh my
And
gosh.
then you look at blame and you realize it's you, and you're like, "Oh no, this code's fine. It's great. I'll be working all weekend cleaning it up."
Yeah. Real quick, do you need me to share my screen back down to you?
No, I can. I've actually got Twitch streaming, so I can actually see what you're presenting. There's just a little bit of a time lag, but I think we're good.
Okay.
So the first one is single responsibility, and I don't know how many of you were Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, and you had the Swiss Army knife that could do everything poorly, and not anything well.
Yeah.
And in software, we look at the same thing, right? Do one thing and do it right. There's laws on the books about not texting and driving, right? Because you're going to wreck the car. In software, we see this quite often, where we find, I'm not meaning to offend anybody here, but God methods, right? They're 5,000 lines long. They're usually called execute. They take 36 parameters, or if they were written in the early 2000s, one XML doc. And it's you've got all this code and you're like, "Oh, I have to make this change," and I'm afraid to change it because I don't know what the side effects are going to be.
Yeah.
So what we really want to focus on is very small classes, even smaller methods. Blaise Pascal once said, "I apologize for the length of this letter. I had not the time to make it shorter." It's easy to just spit out a bunch of code. It's hard to make the code concise, but we should strive to do that. And as a rule of thumb, what I look at is a single method should not take up more than one screen. And I'm not wanting you to do the high school thing where you're changing the font size and the margin so you can fit within the parameters. But if you've got a method that does one thing and one thing only, then you can focus on it. And if that thing has to change, you don't have to worry about side effect bugs. And in reality, the problem that we have as developers is not mainline bugs. We're very good at hitting F5, going through, working the happy path. We're not very good about hitting every single screen after we make a change. It's probably a waste of time. If you've got good unit tests in place, you don't need to do that. But we need to make sure we don't have those side effect bugs. And the best way to limit that and make things maintainable is, again, very small methods, very tightly focused classes, and tightly focused projects. Common argument I get from people when I talk about this is, well, then I'm going to have all these methods and all these classes and all these files. And my answer to that is, yeah, so what? Right? With what's built into Visual Studio, from a navigation and searching capability and everything else, that's a non-issue for me, right? And there's third-party add-ins like ReSharper and I don't want to leave my DevX friends out.
CodeRush.
CodeRush.
Yeah.
That make it even easier. So that's a wash.
Right, and source control, when you have more files, it's easier for you to manage and maintain those changes in smaller files when you're merging into source control instead of a giant file that has dozens of lines of code.
Oh, exactly. One of my developers checked in something that wasn't quite right, and I just looked at the commit in Git, and I saw the file that he changed, and I went into the very class and the method, and I saw the 2 lines of code. I knew exactly where to look. I didn't have to look anywhere else, and we were able to fix it literally in about 10 minutes without having to search in through and worrying about what else we were going to break.
Yeah. Very cool. All right.
So that's single responsibility. So if you want to go ahead and advance.
Yep. There we go. The O.
Yep. And we have a little bit of time lag, so I'm going to wait for it to catch up. So open closed, right? So be open for extension, closed for modification. I think this is a great example because we've, lots of people have built on sunrooms or decks or extended their garage, things like that, but not a whole lot of people are replacing their basements.
Yeah.
And when we look at this in software, we got to think about the same thing. If we have code in production and it's working, the last thing I want to do is change it. Right? We know it works. It's out there. But we want this additional capability. Well, Microsoft did this to an ultimate description with extension methods.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I have this class. I don't want to have to, go in and risk breaking the code. So let's build a capability into the language where we can have an extension method where we're not messing with that working code, but we're extending its capabilities. So, and we'll see some design patterns that show that as well.
Cool. All right. Jump on to the next one. Now, I always wondered who Liskov was, but go ahead.
So, just a very smart person. I don't remember her entire background, but I did look her up at one point. And this is, derived classes can stand in for base classes. And really what we're looking at is we want to make sure that we don't care from a method standpoint, let's say, what's coming in as long as it fits a certain interface. And I used the beer taps as a perfect example. Everybody's into craft beer these days. You got the summer beer and you've got the winter beer, all these changes. And if we didn't allow different beers to stand in for other beers, then every time a bar would switch beers, they'd have to pull new lines, put in a new refrigeration system, add new taps, and completely change it out. Well, that would be silly, right? There's not a bar in the country or the world that would go through that expense just to change beers.
That's a maintenance nightmare.
Right. So what we want to make sure is that we are in C# coding to an interface. I have an iRepo, and it has certain methods on it, and I can have things derived from that. For example, a customer repo or a product repo. And the base class, the class that is accepting this interface is going to call get or save. Doesn't care whether it's a summer shanty or a winter logger. It just says, hey, I've got this interface. I'm going to call into it.
That makes sense. All right. Interface segregation.
Yeah, so this one is, really, if you're following single responsibility, this is a non-issue. The picture that I'll show you, I was fortunate enough to speak in Hawaii a few years ago, and I got to tour the Mighty Mo, the Missouri, the battleship. And this is one part of the wall for firing the 17-inch guns.
Oh, wow.
3 sets of 3 17-inch guns, an entire room. The walls are all covered with this, and there's a huge thing in the center of the room that does the exact same thing. Now, that class of battleship could hit, and I'm going to mess the numbers up because 90% of all statistics are made up anyway, but they could literally shoot over Diamond Head and hit a very small target very far away, very accurately, all analog.
Wow.
The problem was when they took the Missouri out of mothballs for the first Gulf War, the Navy said, hey, let's automate it. We're going to program this. And they spent a gazillion dollars. I don't know what the real number is, but it was a lot, I'm sure. And they couldn't get it nearly as accurate. So they said, well, we got to stick with the analog system. And then they looked around the Navy and said, does anybody know how to fire these guns? And nobody on active duty did. They literally had to pull a bunch of people out of retirement to teach the current Navy operators how to fire the guns.
Wow.
If you've ever used some of the interfaces that came with ASP.NET Web Forms, and I know Web Forms is near and dear to your heart, Jeff, but
Yes.
holy cow, some of those interfaces, when IntelliSense scrolls, you're just causing absolute confusion for your developers. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our interfaces are very fine-grained and client-specific. And if you inherit something from a library like Web Forms, you can always create a new interface for just the features that you need.
Yes. Yep. So, alrighty.
All right, next up.
Now, we had an interesting run-in, you and I, at MVP Summit with somebody who gave a presentation, another MVP, who was talking about a huge over interface definition in somebody's project where they had interfaces that were all over the place, and it was crazy. It's easy to overdo this.
Right. And you know, we don't call it out specifically, but KISS is certainly, I think, one of the main design principles, right? We want to keep it simple.
Yep. All right. Dependency inversion.
Yeah, so I love the picture of the car, and typically when I'm giving a talk on this, I'll ask the audience, you know, who drove to the conference today, and pretty much everybody will raise their hand. And I said, okay, who put the engine in the car before you drove it? And, you know, people are going, we wouldn't do that, except, you know, the guy back in Indiana who works on the pit crew, yep, I did.
Yeah.
We depend on certain things with a car. We depend on an engine. We depend on other mechanical parts that we might not know anything about. But as long as the car subscribes to the iCar interface and it's got a steering wheel, an accelerator, a brake pedal, and depending on where you live, maybe a turn signal, then we can drive that. And the important thing is we can drive any instance of an iCar interface. So when I go travel to a customer or a conference and I rent a car, I can just get in and take that car, right? I'm not stuck with a particular instance. Steve Smith, I've got a link to his course in the show notes that I gave you beforehand, and I think he's actually online listening. And he's got a great statement, right? New is glue. If I am newing something up, then I'm using it at the same time, I'm glued to that implementation, and I can't swap it out.
Yeah. That's a good way to describe it. All right. Should I keep going on the slides?
Yeah, I've got just a few more.
All right. Additional considerations paid for by... No, just kidding.
Yeah. So there's some other things that we need to talk about that are outside of the official solid, you know, macronym, if you want. And, the first one is don't repeat yourself. I have long said that if you write something once, you should think about encapsulating it. If you write something twice, you absolutely have to encapsulate it. If you write the same thing 3 times, I would like you to stop being a developer.
All right.
Clipboard inheritance is not a pattern. And the problem that we get into is we'll have some code, and maybe it's difficult code or it took us a while to write, and we're saying, well, I'm just going to reuse this over here. Well, down the road, somebody's going to have to change that code, whether it's for a defect or a feature or just a requirement change, but they're not going to realize that that exact same code is in your project or your solution 4 different times. So now we have introduced a completely different behavior for one part of the app and not the other part of the app.
Yeah.
A perfect example of this is, or how to get around this, is the factory pattern, right? How many times do we go through, hey, which of these things do we want to create? And if we extract that into the factory pattern, then we have, the factory is a single responsibility. All it does is create things and hand them off, right? We have, we've got abstraction because we're coding to an interface. We're just getting this concrete thing, And if you build the factory correctly, you've got dependency inversion, right? So it kind of wraps up all of that solid stuff.
Very cool. All right. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Boy Scout principle.
Yeah, and I got this from Steve as well. I had been doing this, but I never really formulated it. So props out to him. We did several talks together back in the day. And I was a Boy Scout. I was a Cub Scout, Scout Master. And one thing that we always did on any excursion that we did is we cleaned up, go police the area, and we always wanted to make sure it was cleaner than we found it. And we should do that with code. I mean, we all will walk into, the pile of goo and go, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible," and um, don't do the Alice's restaurant thing. Well, I've got a pile of garbage and there's a pile of garbage down there. Instead of bringing that one up, I'm going to throw mine down. We should say, okay, how can we clean this up a little bit? And people will say, well, I've got an application as 0 unit tests. I said, well, you write that first unit test, you have infinitely improved your test coverage. You can drop the mic and say, I'm out. Right? Just do the simple math.
Just start.
Yeah. And it's also important to realize that, as Boy Scouts, we didn't go randomly pick areas to clean up. I mean, we did for service projects, but we cleaned up the places we were. And I think that's important to stress, because if you are tasked with simply removing technical debt and cleaning up code that you're not moving the ball forward, your customer is going to get frustrated, whether it's internal or external, because you're not adding new features, and your developer is going to get frustrated, right? It is no fun to do that. But if we pick things up as we go, over time, you'll have a much better code base.
Very cool. Sushinator says, I like the Boy Scout principle, but it can get tricky if it comes to code reviews and source control. Running ReSharper to format code can be bad in this respect, and it hides the important changes.
Yeah, I mean,
Good point.
code reviews is a whole nother conversation, and we tend to not do code reviews in their formal sense of code reviews, because all my developers pair program. So they're code reviewing all along. Beyond the scope of what we have time for.
Sure.
So,
all right. One more slide here. Yagni. Oh, look at that. That's not something I want in gold.
Yeah, the perfect example of this, I was working for Anheuser-Busch a whole lot of years ago, and my manager came to me and said, I would like a calculator added into this program so that I can add things without having to leave the program. Well, me being an engineering graduate, I heard the word calculator. He was asking for the ability to add within the program. So I built a TI-35 simulator inside this program. Took me a while to do, and he's like, what's going on? Why is it taking so long? I'm like, hold on, I'm almost done. And I go to show him all the features I built into it. He's like, where's the add button? I'm like, wait, I got 1 over sine, I got y to the x, I've got cosine, I've got all these things. Yeah, just all we needed was an add button. And we tend to do this as developers, right? Customer comes to you, or maybe the story card says, add X. And we think to ourselves, well, while I'm in here, they're going to ask for Y. So I might as well just build it. Well, the problem with that is, A, they didn't ask for it. And B, the more lines of code you have, the higher the probability that you're going to have bugs. And so we got to keep, again, single responsibility, keep things small, and just build to what we were asked to build. That's the whole mantra behind test-driven development and behavior-driven development, right? We're going to write a failing test, and we're going to write just enough code to make the test pass. Then we write just enough code to make all the different test cases pass.
Don't over-engineer it.
Don't over-engineer it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you liked that slide, you're going to love the next one.
Oh, let's see what we got here. Wait a sec. Separation of concerns. Okay. Oh my gosh. Is that a shower in someone's kitchen with a toilet next to it?
Yes. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I mean, you can follow the link to see where I got the picture.
Oh my gosh.
Right. I've actually stayed in hotel rooms kind of like that. I guarantee you, I never used that kitchen.
No.
We would go out.
No.
And it's not just the fact that you're I mean, dogs won't even do this, right? That's why we kennel dogs, because they don't want to poop where they sleep.
Yeah.
Um, but we tend to do things like call classes string handler or something manager or something utility. And we figure, there's somebody else already built this thing. We're going to throw this other code in there because I don't know where else to put it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What we want to make sure that we do is, again, single responsibility, separation of concerns follows along those lines that says put things where they belong and don't mush them together because of convenience.
Yeah. And Ace Flames here is saying that actually pretty useful, cooking my eggs while taking a shower. No, you don't want to be doing that.
Well, I'm okay with cooking eggs while taking a shower. There's the other option that I wouldn't be too fond of.
No. No, no. All right. Moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
All right. Demo time.
Yeah, so let's start with, before we get into design patterns, let's really talk about
Oh,
DI.
I've got to log back in here. Onto this machine. There
You're
we go. And I am
sharing.
following you. There we go.
Okay. All right. So what I have here, and this is, I gave Jeff the link for this. It's in GitHub. It is a subset of my bigger patterns talk, and this is all in core. So I've got a class library, two class libraries, one for tests and one for design patterns, but I also have just a simple ASP.NET Core 2.1 application that we're going to play with a dependency injection right in there.
Okay.
So if we look at the configure services method, we have this ability to add things into the DI container. Now, I do want to just step back for a minute. There is a really nice DI container built into ASP.NET Core. MVC has always supported DI, wasn't built in. Web Forms is getting there.
It's there. We deployed it in 4.7.2.
All right, it's there. Sorry, I haven't been keeping up.
That's okay.
4.5 is the last time I did any Web Forms work. What I hear a lot at conferences, especially when I'm giving my whole day workshop on ASP.NET Core, they're like, well, we're going to use our own because it's better. And I come back to them and I say, that's fine, you can, but try what's built in to see if it does what you need it to. There's a perception out there, unfortunately, because of some history, that what is provided by Microsoft isn't very good. So I want to tell you that you will probably have everything you need with the built-in container, but if you don't, you can swap it out and it's very easy to do. So I'm just asking, give peace a chance, right?
Absolutely.
Give it a try.
A lot of smart people worked on building that.
Yeah. So there's 4 different ways that we can add things into the services container. Transient is created each time they are requested. To be honest, I've never used this in real life. To me, that's way more work than what I want the server to be doing. I mean, it's literally, if I require 4 of iFoo, to go through this path, and I have a request coming in, it's going to create it 4 times. And I just haven't found a need, but you might, so it's there. What I typically use is scoped, and that's created once per HTTP request. So if I need 4 iFoos through my call chain, the first one gets created, and then it gets reused as we go through that request, that user's request. And then when that request is over, it is disposed of, and we don't have to worry about bleeding over into other sessions. Singleton is also out there, and there's lots of, so I did a whole series, the links for this are in the show notes as well, on Channel 9 on design patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Huge argument on the singleton pattern. And we're going to talk about the singleton pattern when we get into it. I guess we'll have to watch time. Singleton, by definition, is max of 1 instance per application. Probably the most overused pattern because it's easy. So we really need to think about, do we really need to make sure that we only have 1? And if you do, then add it as a singleton. As a side note, if you add it as a singleton in configure services, it does not have to be, and I would dare say should not be, a truly singleton object, because the DI container will take care of the singletonness for you. Is that the right word? Yeah, sure. It is now.
We're
And then,
coining words as we go.
yes, an instance is very similar to singleton, but it's created when the instance is called. So anyway, let's look at, I gotta make sure I've got two instances of Visual Studio open, so I'm gonna make sure I'm looking at the right one.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got just some silly little classes out here. Let's look at an iRepo. Whenever I'm working with any framework, I always write my own repositories. This is pretty much what my iRepo looks like in every project that I do. And then I have a repo that derives from that, and we'll just call it a customer repo with type customer. So nothing's implemented because we're not actually going to do anything with it, but I just want to show you how easy it is to use dependency injection in ASP.NET. Now, the nice thing about having it injected in is I don't have to worry in any of my classes in my application where the customer repo is coming from. It will automatically appear. So if we have Entity Framework in here, that is also injectable, so we don't have to worry about where's the connection string, what options am I using retry logic, those types of things. It's just all handled by the DI container. So with the magic of clipboard inheritance, which I told you not to do,
Yeah.
we're going to add in the customer repo into the DI container. So I say anytime an iRepo of type customer is asked for within the call stack, give it an instance of customer repo. And there's lots of overloads that we can do where if we have constructor arguments and things like that. So I'm not going to get into all of that. The documentation is actually really good for ASP.NET Core and EF Core. So now we've added into the DI container. How do we use it? Well, there's two different ways we can use it. And I was actually quite surprised. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and another speaker was complaining about the DI framework that you couldn't do method injection. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Did they break it in 2.1? We can always do method injection. And I guess people weren't aware that you could also do method injection. But let's talk about constructor injection first. And so what we're going to do is create a constructor. And then we very simply just say iRepo of customer repo. And let's fix our links. And then let's add that right here. And now anywhere in this class, I can use that repo. I don't have to worry about where it comes from. It just comes. So that is method injection. If I wanted to do it with, sorry, that's constructor injection.
Constructor, yeah.
If I want to do it with method injection, let's say I had an iRepo of foo, which I don't have, but I only need it in this method. I can do this, but what I have to do is tell the DI container that is coming from the services.
So that hint inside square brackets, we haven't seen that so far today. That's a feature that allows you to tell the compiler a little bit more information about how to get that parameter.
Right. And they being Microsoft, has gone back and forth a few times on this. Initially, you didn't have to add that. Then you had to add it in. I'm actually very good with having to add it in because it makes it very clear to somebody looking at my code that I'm not passing this in. It's not coming from the view on a post. It's coming from the DI container.
It goes back a little bit towards that Boy Scout principle you were talking about. It's very explicit for me to see, and it's very clean, describing exactly what's happening.
Correct. I'm going to go ahead and delete this because we're going to use a little different example that people might not be aware of, and I love this feature. So I have a custom settings class that is really silly. It has my setting 1 and my setting 2. I'm not very good at naming things. As a matter of fact, I've always believed that the three hardest things about software development are naming conventions and off by one errors. But I have in my app settings, I have something called custom settings with my setting 1 and my setting 2. One's a string and one's an int. Well, let's add that into the DI container. And again, just to make it a little more expedient, I'm going to go ahead and just copy it in.
Now,
And so, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a question. You were showing the constructor injection and method injection. Is method injection limited to only the controller?
No. No, anywhere in your application that's within the call stack of ASP.NET. So it can be in different assemblies, it can be in classes, but as long as the services container is active in the application, it can get those things injected in.
There you go.
And to be clear, you can also call into the services container directly and then pull things out that way. I chose not to show that today. It's an edge case that you can do. Just go to docs.asp.net and it's all there for you.
Cool.
So this is something new within ASP.NET Core, and I love this feature. We do this for all of our settings, like email configurations and everything else. So I have this class right here called Custom Settings, and I say get that information out of this section. Now, if I was using Azure Storage Vault or the Secrets Manager, it's going to find that. This is coming out of app settings, so the different environments will be picked up correctly. So one line of code handles all my environments through the configuration and environmental awareness. And then I can also use this in dependency injection, but the syntax is just a tad different. What we need to do is, again, from services, but let's poke this into the index method. And we have to call Option Snapshot of custom settings. Now, the Option Snapshot is different than Options in that the Option Snapshot will pick up changes to the JSON as the app is live. Where we just do Options, it won't pick up those changes. So now, if I want to add in, for example, let's just dump something into the view bag. And we say viewbag.setting1 equals custom settings. Now we have to actually get the value that is coming from. So that's like the instance, right, of the Option Snapshot. But now this is full IntelliSense. This is of type custom settings. You see my two silly names. And then
actually, they can't see the IntelliSense. Let me do a control dot on that. There we go. Control space. And we can see the IntelliSense now there on Twitch.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries.
My bad. All right. So if I wanted to throw this into the view and get something out of it, the full code has that as an example. But I want to show one other thing that people might not be aware of. If I look at the index controller, belay that. If I look at the about controller, I can do a new syntax, new since ASP.NET Core, and say @inject. And then I put my type. In this case, it's an options
where did
snapshot.
You go? Hang on. You wandered off from me. There we are.
Are we caught up?
Yep.
Okay. Because my Twitch view is lagging. So option snapshot. Easy for me to say 3 times. Custom settings.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then we'll just call it custom settings. And then we have to just update our using. And then if I want to dump something out, I can just H4 and say @custom settings dot. Again, we have to get the values. You might want to set that in a razor block, but just for this example, my setting 1. We use this, for example, when things are in development, we have the entire background of the menu bar is red. When it is in integration, we make it green. And then when we go live, it's the customer's color of choice.
Yep. That's
right. And we inject that right into the layout, and we don't have to worry about writing a whole bunch of if-then statements.
Right. It's easy for everybody to see exactly what environment you're running in.
Yes.
When you're testing. You can immediately see from a screenshot, oh, you're in development mode. You're in the quality assurance testing area.
Right. So if we didn't have dependency injection to do this, we would be writing a fair amount of code to get the configuration. What environment am I in? What values do I want to pull out? In this case, I'm just saying, hey, I've got this custom settings. Maybe it's the web API hosts, right? And it's got the URIs and all that other information in there.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see the DI makes it so much simpler for the downstream developer to just work on that. All
Very
right.
cool.
Anything in the chat window that you want to shout out to before we move on?
There's a comment here. I prefer to use the name of custom settings to avoid the string there if it's possible. I think that was in the setup that you were
Yep.
doing
So the problem is
right there. Yeah, on
this
41.
you can't use the name of. Name of will work with classes and properties, will not work with sections within the JSON. So
So
what I have done in that case, I'm sorry to interrupt, I will set up a set of constants to use
there you go.
to get rid of the magic strings. I also firmly believe magic strings are evil.
The the only reason that I could see using name of there is if you've set up the standard, right, that convention that the name of the section matches the name of your custom settings class.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good point. So we could use the custom settings class to use the name of there. In this case, they happen to match, and they should.
Right.
But this is demo code that I've used in my workshops, and I will go in and then change the section to show that it still works. So, yep, I'm tracking now. Apologize.
No, it makes perfect sense. You know, we're lucky here that they match, but you're right. You might
Yep.
want to have a different name in your actual configuration. All right.
Right.
Where would you like to go next? We got about 10 minutes.
Okay. 10 minutes. Do we have any good questions we want to go to? I mean, tell you what, if they want to, and it's all free to you guys, I've got tons of videos. We did 10 with Robert Greene on Channel 9, and we dive into each of these patterns very deeply on those. So it might be better because those aren't interactive, right? You're just going to watch it. So if we've got good questions from the audience, maybe we take the last 10 minutes to do Q&A. If we don't have good questions, I see lots of things flying by, but I'm not reading them. Then we can go into a couple patterns.
They're commenting that they'd like to see patterns, but there is one question here. Do you recommend using areas in MVC?
Oh boy. I hate answering questions like that. I'm going to do the old consultant thing and say it depends.
I think that's a great answer.
I love areas where they make sense. The problem is, like the singleton, they can be overused. So if you've got something that needs to be cordoned off from the main site, maybe an admin portal, areas makes perfect sense for that. I'll just tell you, I don't like the 2.1 identity, ASP.NET identity, where they've made that an area. I think they've added lots of friction to the process that is really a cross-cutting concern and should not be put in an area.
Okay, that's interesting feedback. Valid.
So, okay, let's talk about the adapter and facade. I think that is a great way to talk about interface segregation as well as cleaning things up. So an adapter is very much like, I'm old enough to remember when there were two-prong or two-hole outlets, if you will, that didn't have that third hole in the house, and my dad would come home with something that took 3 prongs.
Right, you're talking about the United States electric power adapters.
Yes,
and so
I did what every self-respecting geek would do, is I broke off that third prong. What we really should do is plug in an adapter to make that 3-prong plug fit into the 2-prong outlet. And I think the adapter pattern is very, very key to understand, because there are many times where we have something that we're coding to. For example, maybe it is a credit card interface, and we change providers, and we don't want to have to rewrite all of our line of business code, but the API is completely different. So if we look at some interfaces, and I have an iCharacter interface. Now, my examples are never domain specific. I write silly examples so people don't get hung up on domains. But let's say I've got a flying squirrel, I've got a moose, and I've got a bad guy. And to be clear, these should never be in one file. They should all be in their own file.
Sure.
and I have a comment in real life, separate these into their own files. But from teaching, it's easier to have one. I want to deal with a group of these things. Maybe I've got Boris and Natasha and Rocky and Bullwinkle, and I want to set up an array list so I can iterate over them and do things. I can certainly do it as a non-strongly typed thing and call into each one and say, hey, if X is an I-flying squirrel, then do this. But the problem is then each time I have to check and each time I have to translate, well, what does chase mean for a flying squirrel?
Yeah.
And now I'm slowing down my development. So if I create an adapter where, for example, I take an iMoose and I pass it into the moose adapter, and I've already done the mapping. Chase equals run, flee equals run, and attack equals charge. Well, then all I need to do is use my moose adapter. I know the methods. In real life, if these methods are verify address, charge credit card, send receipt, then as a developer, I know I'm going to charge a credit card, I pass in a credit card. The API might be completely different from what I think it is, but I don't care because the adapter takes care of that for me.
So you're passing in an iMoose, and you're rerouting those methods that a character has to those appropriate things that the moose does instead. I get it.
Yes.
All right.
Now, when we look at a facade, and this is probably something we'll use more in our day-to-day lives than an adapter. Adapter, I'm really making one thing look like something else. When we take a facade, the main difference is we're dealing with multiple things that we probably only need parts of, and we want to make it easy to use. So let's say that we've got this old inventory system, and we've got this point of sale system, and we've got a picking system, we've got a shipping system, and we only need one or two methods from each of those. And it's not documented well. The methods are called things like execute and do it and everything else. As a developer, if I want to charge a credit card or order inventory, I have to remember or figure out through reverse engineering, how do I do that? Well, what's better is to take the bad APIs. For example, I've got these two with very bad method names.
Oh yeah.
And I say, let's build a facade. And we only need these methods out of them. Add three numbers, add then multiply with a couple different parameter lists, and then add then multiply, right? So three variations of that. And then we take in an I confusing and an I overdone. And we should really not do, and that's why I say demo code right here, right? So I am newing and using at the same time. This is bad.
Yeah.
And that's why I commented that it's demo code. I inject in my badness, and then I output the goodness, right? So Voldemort comes in, and Dumbledore comes out.
Nice.
So now I'm calling add three numbers, and yeah, somebody has to bite the bullet and figure out what that really means. But you do it once, and it's there for perpetuity. Perpetuality?
Perpetuated.
For a long time. Yes.
Yeah.
Something along those. We'll see how many. If anybody's following along with buzzword bingo, I think that's the third word I made up today.
All right. Yeah, I like the facade pattern there. Simplify it, get it into a more descriptive facility class that I can use and I can depend on, and then you're right, change out as need be later if there is something that needs to be changed.
So I see in the comments that somebody mentioned Clean Code by Robert C. Martin. No, we talked about Uncle Bob, and that's where the solid principles came from. I did not mention his book. So Clean Code is a great book.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are almost up against time. There was a comment here about what design patterns are most heavily used in .NET web development besides MVC DI repository patterns.
So I would say the most heavily used ones are the ones the developer just read.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
And because that's a problem you run into, right? You learn a design pattern, and you go, hey, I've got a hammer. I'm going to find a nail. I'm going to make it look like a nail. Here's what I like about design patterns. when my team has meetings and we're talking about how we're going to design some stories or some functionality, I don't allow them to use a whiteboard or a marker. As soon as you give an engineer a dry erase marker and a whiteboard, then they start drawing figures and putting names on the board, and it devolves into pettiness about what you call things. We talk in design patterns, and we'll figure out how we want to do this feature based on what design pattern best represents that feature. And there's not always a fit. Sometimes you just got to sling code. But if you really understand these and spend time doing katas and go like to Project Euler, it's not a link I gave you, but it's a bunch of math problems where you can just say, I'm going to try and figure out how to do this with this particular design. Then what you really start seeing is the lady in the red dress instead of the ones and zeros. And that's a Matrix reference if you haven't all seen that.
Real quick, I want to thank Leallen.com. That's our friend Dimitri Leallen. Thank you so much for the subscription. We're going to match that subscription and send a donation off to Girl Develop It like we do for all of our subs and bits that are cheered here throughout the day on the stream and on other days that we're here.
Yeah, so the head first, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, go for it.
I know we're running out of time. Head First Design Patterns is a fantastic book. I think everybody who is an architect or wants to be an architect has to own the Gang of Four book.
Yes.
But I think everybody should read the Head First Design Patterns book. It is exceptionally well written. It's lighthearted. Matter of fact, there is 2 pages in there where the adapter and the facade are arguing back and forth as to who's better. And if you want to know the minute differences between them, there's more than what I said. You'll remember it because of the way that book is written. So that's a great book to read.
Very cool.
Any other questions before we close out?
What's your opinion about OOP versus functional programming?
I think every tool has its use.
Yeah.
The problem that I think with functional programming right now is that you've got some people that are getting lots of media time who think that everything should be done functional. And I think functional has a great place in the development lifecycle. I think OO has a great place in the development lifecycle. And if you understand both, you can use them where they best fit.
Fantastic. All right. Tell you what, if you have some of those book references, if you can send us over a pull request to that, to the GitHub page, we can add a couple of those extra book references into the list there so that folks can either download for the Kindle, go buy it from Amazon. That'd be very, very helpful. I think we got some really good questions here. It was a great conversation. I think everybody learned. I'm certainly seeing some really good follow-up questions.
Yep. So
awesome.
I don't know what you have scheduled next. I have time if you want to take some more questions. If you need to eat some food because you've been on for 27 hours.
Actually, here, let's push that into the. Look at this. I've got a command here in the chat room, bang up time, and it says, "Oh yeah, we've been going for 7 hours now." And I believe I saw Imo wandering around the chat room a little bit earlier, and our friend Tasha is in there also. Dimitri's hanging out. We're going to roll over to them. This was a really good conversation. If you're interested, Phil, I'd love to have you back during one of our normal, in the middle of the week streams and talk a little bit further on some of these patterns.
Sure. Great.
All right. Fantastic. Oh, Dimitri, don't worry. This is all being recorded, and it'll be available on YouTube later today. So thanks so much, Phil, for joining us. I'm going to
thanks for having me.
Wrap it up here so that we can start getting Imo set to go. This was really cool. We've got all bunch of links for Phil back on. Let me show you. Let's go to. It is C# Fritz.livestream. And under C# Workshop here, and there's also a link in the event page. You'll see all the links from our guests here today. Where can I learn more? Sarah gave us a bunch of Git links. Steve gave us a couple of links here to courses and his weekly Dev Tips podcast. Phil gave us some links to a couple of books on Apress that he's written, his lynda.com videos, his blog, of course, his Twitter. And we'll see if we can get a couple more of those books linked and put into this section here. All right. Thanks so much. I'm going to hang up with Phil. I'll catch you next time. We'll organize something to come back a little bit later.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jeff.
All righty. See you, Phil.
Thanks, everybody.
All righty. And I'm going to disconnect. There goes Phil. And let me go back.